It takes a great deal of effort to make someone feel engrossed in a fictional story. The characters need a bit of relatability, the plot should feel enticing, and the world has to lay the framework for the characters and the plot to even exist. And call it a bias on my side, but if you have watched my videos before, you would know that I enjoy a thoughtful world building, the ones where they establish the world to be the lifeblood of the story. Without the world building, the story simply wouldn't make sense. Without the world, the story has no point in even existing. But it is quite rare when the elements converge in a way that the world building overshadows the story itself, when the world eats up most of its significance to the point where you look around confused, when the limits of comprehension get questioned and your mind wanders beyond what it's supposed to do. Rarely does world building make you feel insanely small. In the manga Blam, which is probably one of the many ways I've heard people pronounce it, the story begins with the protagonist walking across what is seemingly a modular bridge. The panels of the manga gives you information regarding the height of the bridge, closely followed by its length. But all the while, there is no sight of any address on the panel. You are thrown into this world with no context of what it even is. From the drawings, you get this strange sense of paradoxical designing that sweeps across the environment. The lines are weirdly architectural in design. It is sharp enough to show purpose, but it is also casually sketched and beyond the bounds of necessity. The panel seems endless in all directions without even needing to. But this forms the appetizer to the many panels of the manga that facilitate this feeling of largeness. That feeling of smallness is often contextualized in many shapes and forms depending on the matter of explanation, but it is often remarked that such structures have a foreboding quality about them. A skyscraper looming at a distance has no actual cause for concern, for after all, the subject is inanimate. But sometimes a strange irrationality meanders in the mind to induce a degree of uneasiness while gazing upon them. The illogical fear of large objects, or megalophobia, is the place where that feeling of insignificance originates. And that irrational fear wouldn't seem so absurd to try to comprehend the looming megastructures in Blam. The scale is immense, and although there are traces of an intelligent design wherever you look, it is made abundantly clear that this intelligence does not seem to be of a human nature. The protagonist stands in a hallway that is clearly not meant for the human size. And it is not that humans can't build such structures. In fact, historical monuments have always been designed with a lavish, grandiose scale. But here, there is something else at work. The immensity of such hallways are easily conspicuous. Forget about humans, there are not even visible life forms to distract you from its grandeur. You can't help but contrast the lonely human presence to the outer-scale nature of his environment. For all its magnificence, you can't help how abandoned these landscapes seem to feel. The bridges seem to have no end. The stairways appear to go on forever. The pillars submerge into the darkness of the void. There is a feeling of perpetuity that consumes the world building. By design, it isn't meant for human comprehension. There were times when I felt like the world was deliberately giving me less information about the things I was seeing so that I could fill in the gaps and let my imagination make sense of it. And there is this one scene halfway into the final volume when Killy opens the door and finds himself atop a giant pillar. The ceiling is devoid of details and largely covered in darkness, as if he was staring into the night sky. Away into the distance, he could only see the silhouettes of giant structures akin to the one he was standing on. And even with all the things he had endured before, the scale of this place seemingly levels up in comparison by a magnitude that is hard to even discern. Killy walks up to a strange entity for some information. And it is only then when we realize he was standing in a spherical room that was roughly about the size of the planet Jupiter. A room that was a mind-shattering 143,000 kilometers in diameter. It is not often when world building makes you feel that unimportant. In a room of that magnitude, what does it even mean to be a human being walking along to find the other end? In another scene, that irrational fear perhaps carries a bit more purpose. At the end of the first volume, Hilly and Sibo cross paths with the behemoth of a creature, a cybernetic organism that is seemingly plugged into the mainframe of this complex world. And in one of the drawings, the hand of this beast reaches out to grab hold of the two characters, and it feels like an oversized hand trying to swat a fly. You can't help but feel inconsequentially tiny in comparison. And truth be told, such scope of immensity is simply incomputable to the human mind. But this feeling of megalophobia would perhaps be a step in the right direction to even begin to comprehend the world of Blom. This megacity is for all intents and purposes a cybernetic structure that has completely gone out of control to the point where it continues to construct complex structures without an ending in sight. And the result of this malfunctioning system is a sprawling city, which is suggested to be about the size of Jupiter's orbit, something comparable to a Dyson sphere according to its creator. The fear of large objects is simply the placeholder here. The extent of insignificance has no limits in such places. And the only surprise after reading the manga would be if someone didn't feel existential. But it's not just the irrational fear of such megastructures that makes me feel small. When you contextualize the insignificance even further, you realize that there is much more to it than what meets the eye. In this drawing, Killy walks up a staircase. On either side, there is substance, but they are devoid of anything meaningful. It feels like there should be some form of life that exists in such a place, but for one reason or the other, they are nowhere to be seen, almost like they suddenly stopped existing. The panel makes the stairway seem endless, as if Killy would walk on forever. And this feeling of an endless transitional state is accompanied by what is referred to as liminality. If you have been on the internet for the past 5 years or so, I'm pretty sure you would have a pretty good idea of what a liminal space means. A seemingly endless hallway, an abandoned parking lot, an empty classroom. They're all symbolic of a transition, a place in between places. And these spaces are notorious for how strange and eerie they make you feel, as if you are at the precipice of a mystery that you can't quite solve. An ambiguity that slowly feeds on the mind the more you explore such environments. And it feels like the architecture of Blom was designed with that purpose in mind. It disorients the normal mind. Just like the staircase, it offers a feeling of the known but made convoluted amongst the unknown. You don't even know where exactly the protagonist is going. The whole world seems labyrinthian, as if these transitional states are all that exists in this world, never to assign purpose or a destination. Killy walks into a room and looks up. All he sees is a winding silhouette of stairs that seem to fade into the night sky. It was as if he was standing on the edge of the unknown, but later we learned that the destination was about 3,000 kilometers away. And as he walks up further, the liminality of this space becomes more and more apparent. There are moments when he sits down to take rest, only to look up and see the exact same winding silhouette of stairs. It was as if the staircase was endless, as if no matter how much he walked, there was no destination to reach. But in our previous rendition of the Endless, Killy does eventually reach the top. But there, he's welcomed by the side of another flight of stairs. Killy climbs. The panel now portrays Killy walking along a corridor that's empty as it could ever be. But there is light at the end of this tunnel. And as he leaves the darkness behind, the landscape scales up by an insane magnitude, but so does the emptiness. And when I gaze upon this drawing, it reminds me of a style of architecture that I have seen in real life, or maybe even on the TV. This place oddly resembles a style of Moorish architecture. Perhaps a fortress or a castle from North Africa could jog your memory. And in my mind, I can picture this place sprawling with people, markets and vendors, and just simply people going on about their mundane lives. But yet, it feels like that place was erased from here. Something was supposed to be here when Killy walked through the doorway, but it simply isn't. It gives you a strange sense of nostalgia, but you can't quite understand why such a giant landscape would be devoid of people. It is understandably liminal in nature. I could stare into this hallway and never see the end of it. Where does it go? I do not know, but I must traverse it regardless. I could find an opening like this and stare into an unfinished structure. Or could it be the ruins of what it once was? I do not know. I could stand in this doorway and feel incredibly small, and yet I wouldn't know why it needs to be so immense. Everything here points to a transitional state. Only a part of it seems to make sense. The rest is engrossed in a mysterious emptiness. And judging by the repetition of designs, the place might as well be looped. The end might as well be the beginning. Kili could walk forever, and he could reach no destination. Such is the liminality of the world building. But within the decomposition of this cybernetic landscape, you can't help but feel that you don't belong here. From minute one, the world even tells you that humans are not welcome here. Why else would the protagonist stand so alone in these landscapes? And I do understand that Kili is a cyborg and emotions are not particularly his optimal skill set. But here, he is the representative for the human race. Not just on a technicality, but for us reading the story, you understand the world through Kili. And hence, humanizing the cyborg is our best shot in feeling this world, in comprehending even a sliver of its intricacies. Whenever you see someone standing alone in an environment, it tends to make them feel small. When the act is done voluntarily, it might just evoke a level of sadness. You wonder what the protagonist is going through in their life for them to be alone. But in a different light, you can be lonely without even wanting to. And this frame of thought is encapsulated by the lack of dialogue that lets the environment absorb you. In fact, there is a reason why people say this manga is a bit incomprehensible. It doesn't really tell you what you want to hear. The information given is only the one that's necessary. Everything else is up in the air, up to your imagination. There are times when the story would go page after page with absolutely no dialogue whatsoever, telling you to soak up the emotions of these drawings, to piece the world together. But as you do that, it's not just the irrationality of the immense, nor the liminality of the endless that makes you feel small, but rather it is the loneliness of these drawings that made me feel ever so unimportant. In The Hunt for the Parallel Battery Storage Cluster, Chapter 51, there is literally no dialogue from the start to the end. From this sketch, as well as the fandom website that I confirmed with, it takes Kili about 14 years to go through the restoration process. And once he comes out, he goes searching for batteries to consume its energy. And that journey, for the lack of a better word, is quite lonely. There are drawings where he sits alone crouching, panels where he stands alone in the middle of vast and empty spaces. But as he approaches the destination, his presence is stunningly overshadowed by the size of the landscape. He is turned into a literal dot on the right side of the sketch. You physically have to strain your eyes to even find where he is. And I do understand that he is a cyborg and he can't feel the loneliness like us normal humans. But watching a contrast such as this, no matter how robotic the protagonist could be, you can't run away from that visceral feeling of being alone. Imagine switching places with him in this seemingly endless room. Could you even bear the presence of something of this scale without being unsettled? And drawings of such nature are littered all across the panels of this manga. You would find moments where Kili is all alone, standing in the middle of sceneries that visually eclipses the human body. I'm pretty sure he is looking up at something in this drawing, but at a glance, or even if you were given several opportunities, you couldn't explain this environment to the best of your capacity. The mind would struggle to give it meaning. In these landscapes, when you are scaled down to a speck, what chance do you have to be in control of your destiny? In places like these, nothing but alone, what purpose could you possibly serve? But all the while, you wonder, when space and time are opposite sides of a continuum, one would significantly impact the other. wouldn't it? In the fourth chapter, when Killy is interrogated by a bunch of renegades, he reveals that he came from 5,000 strata below. And based on the time it takes to traverse the length of one strata, which can be up to a month, there is a good possibility that Killy had been walking this lonesome journey for more than 400 years. And letting that time frame sink into the human psyche does awful things to the general sense of reality. Wrapping your mind around such vast distances and time is simply unfathomable for the social creature within us. That is isolation beyond imagination. And to put a bow on it, the final chapter of the manga puts a different perspective on the loneliness of the journey. Although it isn't explicitly stated, in a virtual dimension, during an interaction, a question pops up. Do you think he's still out there, continuing his quest? Asks Mori. If he manages to complete his mission, then we'll probably know of it here too, replies the worm-like entity. For now, there is nothing we can do but wait. And there is a feeling that the continuity of the story, no matter how non-linear it feels, it kinda ends here. But once I turned the page, I got confused as to why this next section even exists. Killy struggles to climb out of a pit. He drags his tired body onto the surface and crumbles to the ground. A part of his leg seems to be missing. And as he lies there bleeding, staring into the sky, drops of rain crash into his face. And in these drawings is conveyed the humanity of this character. And everything that follows in this chapter from here onwards is a state of a man who can't stop until he completes his mission. And it is only then when I connected the space between these chapters. He must have continued his journey for hundreds of years at this point. And as the story kept reminding me, he is a cyborg, and I do understand it. But to even think of a journey that lonely for that long, through all the things he's been through, it is simply impossible to not feel small even as I write this down. This is what the world of Blam does to the human mind. But throughout this time, I feel like I've been contradicting myself about the emptiness of this world. Of course, a part of me does feel small because of it, but the other, it does so for the exact opposite. There are layers upon layers of things that hardly remind you of places you've been to. It is surreal. You could even call it unnatural, a complexity that when given context makes you feel unwelcome. These drawings confuse you as to how disconnected they seem from one another. There are moments when sketches look industrial and complex, as if there is some insane technology that's being developed here. But then you contrast these with such man-made architecture, something that seems deliberately designed to fit a human ambition. It's hard to put that feeling into words, a combination of synthetics and purposeful human design. And this feeling of complexity is further defined by all that's abandoned and decomposing. And I guess decomposition, on a technicality, is probably not the right word to define the aging of robotics. But still, there is something strange in these drawings, as if the world left these things behind to silently decay. In these ruins, there is a sense of great importance that now has become inconsequential. In the second chapter, Killy is accompanied by a mysterious girl and her dog. They sit on an isolated platform in a narrow alley. After a conversation related to the mission, there is a moment of silence. The three look up. "It's getting dark," says the girl, as the panel portrays the endless walls almost caving in on them. But this drawing had me thinking for another reason. What does dark even mean in this context? Maybe they are seeing the night sky through this narrow slit in the ceiling. Or maybe it's just a perception of time. But it is maybe one of the only moments in the story when you feel that separation between night and day. In a story that is endless as it could possibly be, what significance does a day and night actually have? For me, it felt strange that the story even bothered to offer me that. And Blam is kinda unique for that. There are panels of great action and complexity, followed by drawings of great serenity. There are some insane combat sequences and intricate machine demonstrations that are followed by drawings such as these, where almost nothing happens at all. But these complexities are balanced by that emptiness, almost like a glass half empty, glass half full kind of scenario. In chapter 3, when Killy is found lying unconscious on the floor by a bunch of nomads, they decide to help him. And while they carry him to the doctor, there is a drawing that visibly shows you that complexity again. The architecture, by design, is a tangled mess with a stairway going right through the middle. But on the left side of this panel is visible what I can only assume is a TV screen. Something that I did not expect to see here. But to make matters more fascinating, there seems to be some footage that is playing on it. Two individuals running on a beach, perhaps a representation of a paradise that was lost in the wake of something horrible. At least for me, it was just mere speculation. But then again, what else could it possibly be? But details such as this, once you start observing the art, are ever present throughout the environment. In fact, it forms the visual language of the story. This complexity is by pattern, a combination of the nothingness and the fullness all at once. In some of these panels, there are wires and tubes and metals and synthetics of all sorts, giving me a sensory overload of information. But then the world takes most of it away from you. Drawings where you're offered just enough information to only partially comprehend your presence within it, a sense of sensory deprivation. And when this story leaves you at the edge of the unknown, you feel like you don't really have much choice but to feel small. Be it that irrational fear of the expansive, or the liminality of these landscapes, the loneliness of the storyline, or the complexity of its designs. It almost feels like if one of them doesn't get you, the other one will. There is no escaping that fate. I felt like I had to accept it. But within that feeling of smallness, I dug deep, and maybe that is why I felt like there was a different approach that I could take. Maybe there are two versions of Blom. In one of them, perhaps the certainties of such a world will always catch you out in the end. The world is too big and foreboding to run away from it. But maybe the other version is what the protagonist represents, the antithesis to this unforgiving world. Here's a man, part human, part machine, pushing the extremities of his capabilities, fighting things that are beyond his scope of existence, losing limbs and body parts in the process. With fading memories and barely any emotions, he continues his journey. And no matter what is thrown in his path, resolutely he always finds a way. And it's only at the end that you realize the hope that Killy carries throughout the journey. Compared to the absolute immensity of the world, Killy is insignificantly small. But perhaps in that different perspective, I realized maybe even a small person in this world can change the course of its future. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and maybe consider subscribing as well. And that's about it. I'll see you in the next video.